Hello students, welcome to session 8 of solutions chapter. Last session we have initiated the discussion of colligative properties and we have finished 3 colligative properties: relative lowering of vapor pressure, elevation in boiling point and depression in freezing point. In this session, let us finish off the understanding of the 4th colligative property, that is osmotic pressure, get the required formulae and then get into solving the numerical exercise, a cumulative numerical exercise related to all these 4 colligative properties. Okay. Now, to understand osmotic pressure, you must understand osmosis. Now, before even I define or I make you understand osmosis, let me give you some simple examples. See, suppose at home you have a 1 day old or 2 days old slightly wilted flowers or flower petals, which would have shrunk or would have become dull. You take those flowers or flower petals and put into water. After some time you can notice that these will be reviving slightly, becoming better. Their skin becoming better, they becoming a little more alive than they were. Yes or no? Similarly, this you must not have directly observed, but if blood cells are kept into saline water, so sodium chloride solution or any salt solution, very concentrated salt solution, these blood cells will rupture. Likewise, if you take such examples where the wilted flowers reviving or blood cells put into saline water rupturing, etc., you can understand the logic here. See, saline, the wilted flowers are reviving because they are absorbing water. There is movement of water into them. Similarly, the blood cells are rupturing again because of there is movement of water from saline solution into this. As a result, the blood cells are bulging and rupturing. Now, wherever you are finding movement of water into these flower petals or blood cells, you can notice this water is moving across a membrane. Cell has a cell membrane, plasma membrane we call it, and then even flowers and vegetables, all these things have vegetable membrane right under the skin. So right under the skin, whichever the membrane is present, through that the water is moving. That is what you are understanding in these examples. Now, this membrane through which the water is moving is allowing only water molecules, in otherwise only solvent molecules, but does not allow solute molecules. And all these membranes which we are considering here are like sheet-like structures, huge sheet-like structures which contain submicroscopic pores or holes. Submicroscopic pores or holes such that only solvent molecules can pass through them, solute molecules cannot pass through them. Such membranes are called semi-permeable membranes. Such membranes are called semi-permeable membranes. You must have heard of them many times. Semi-permeable membranes could be natural. Pig's bladder is such a popular example of semi-permeable membrane. Plasma membrane is a natural example of semi-permeable membrane. Okay, so they could be natural, or substances like cupric ferrocyanide, substances like silicates of metals like iron, cobalt, etc., substances like cellophane, all these things are artificially synthesized semi-permeable membranes. So, the popular artificially synthesized semi-permeable membranes are cupric ferrocyanide, silicates of iron, cobalt, nickel, etc., and cellophane. All these things are artificial semi-permeable membranes. All these are, the semi-permeable membranes are such membranes which allow only solvent molecules to pass through them, solute molecules not. Okay, now observe carefully. Say, let me take a vessel with two compartments. Vessel with two compartments. Assume both of them are containing a capillary tube kind of thing here. Okay, and this is the semi-permeable membrane here. Semi-permeable membrane. Now assume one side you have got say solution, means I have dissolved a particular substance, assuming aqueous solution. Let me consider some substance is dissolved into water, and this side say you have pure solvent, that is pure water this side. Now when you fill it, obviously it gets filled until this level, let us say. Now if you wait for some time after these two liquids, that is pure solvent and solution of that solvent is being separated by a semi-permeable membrane, after some time you can notice that the level of liquid in this capillary tube, which is on the solution side, keeps increasing, whereas the level of liquid in this capillary tube that is on the pure solvent side is decreasing, which clearly indicates that the solvent is moving from pure solvent side to solution side. The solvent is moving from pure solvent side to solution side, such that the level of liquid in this capillary tube is increasing. Not only solvent and solution separated from each other, even if two solutions with different concentrations separated from each other. Say, for example, this side it is low concentration solution, this side it is high concentration solution. Then even the solvent keeps moving from low concentration solution to high concentration solution when it is separated by a semi-permeable membrane. Now this phenomenon is exactly called as osmosis. The phenomenon by which solvent molecules move from pure solvent to solution, or move from a solution of lower concentration to that of higher concentration, such that until the concentration in this will be reduced and both the concentrations become equal, the movement will be continued. Likewise, movement of solvent molecules from pure solvent to solution, or from solution of lower concentration to the solution of higher concentration across a semi-permeable membrane is called as osmosis. Okay, understood? Osmosis is biologically a very important phenomenon. We are not talking about any strange process here. Please understand. If plants, roots of the plants are able to absorb water, that is because of osmosis. Why? See, the soil contains lower concentration and the roots of the cell gap in the roots of the trees contains higher concentration. As a result, the water is able to move from soil to the roots and then across the plants or tree. So, absorption of water from soil by plants is due to osmosis. Are you understanding? Similarly, there are many phenomena, biological phenomena, which I will be eventually explaining you. Growth of plants involves osmosis. Okay. Development of plants involves osmosis. Then maintenance of electrolyte balance in the body for blood vessels to function properly involves osmosis. So there are many biologically important phenomena involve osmosis. Now, after understanding osmosis clearly, let us now understand what exactly is osmotic pressure. See, osmotic pressure is something either naturally built or artificially applied. Both perspectives we can understand. I'll explain you quickly here. See, now as I was telling, the solvent started moving from pure solvent to solution or from solution of lower concentration to higher concentration, such that the level of liquid in this capillary tube was continuously increasing, right? Now, at some point, the rise in level of liquid will stop. Why the rise in level of liquid is stopping here? Because continuously the solvent started flowing here, an excess hydrostatic pressure is created here, and that excess hydrostatic pressure created by the increase in level of the liquid causes the pressure to stop the flow of solvent from this side to this side. That excess hydrostatic pressure on the solution side, separated from pure solvent by semi-permeable membrane, or on the higher concentration solution side, separated from lower concentration solution from the semi-permeable membrane, that in turn stops the process of osmosis. So please understand, it is the hydrostatic pressure generated by osmosis and in turn stops the osmosis, stops the flow of liquid due to osmosis, is called osmotic pressure if you talk in terms of naturally built osmotic pressure. Or externally applied osmotic pressure if you are talking about, then there are two liquids separated by semi-permeable membrane like this, where you know that there is concentration gradient, where you know that there is a chance of solvent molecules moving from here to here, and you don't want that to happen. Then you must have already determined the osmotic pressure. By developing how much amount of hydrostatic pressure, the process of osmosis stops. Having that information with you, you are going to exert pressure, or you are going to apply pressure on the solution side or on the higher concentration solution side. Solution side if it is separated by pure solvent, or higher concentration solution side if it is separated by lower concentration solution, whatever the case might be. So excess pressure the external pressure you are applying on this side in order to stop the flow of solvent is called osmotic pressure. Now, this process of checking or controlling osmotic pressure, can lead to a very important phenomenon called reverse osmosis also. What is this reverse osmosis? Just now we established that osmosis is the phenomenon of flow of solvent from solution of lower concentration to the solution of higher concentration, or from pure solvent to solution, right? Now, I understood this much pressure can stop this process to happen. Now, what if I exert more pressure than this? More pressure than the osmotic pressure. What happens? The solvent starts flowing across semi-permeable membrane from solution to the pure solvent. That flow of solvent from solution side to the pure solvent, due to application of more external pressure than the osmotic pressure, is called reverse osmosis. Clear? Now, how is reverse osmosis very useful? These days of very scarcity for potable water, you know very well, fresh water in the world is only 1% of the total water occupying the earth's crust. Yes or no? So we are covered, 3/4 of our land is covered by water, but only 1% of that is fresh water. Majority of it is locked in seas or oceans, which is not potable, which is not drinkable. Now, the areas where there is huge scarcity for drinking water or fresh water, they do desalination, or removing salinity of water from seawater by applying reverse osmosis. Recently, when our neighboring city Chennai had this very huge drinking problem, they have set up desalination centers in the beaches actually, near the oceans. Why that is, on what principle does that work? On the principle of reverse osmosis. Say, one side they will keep the pure water, other side they will take the sea water and they will apply pressure greater than the osmotic pressure on the sea water side. As a result, what only solvent can, of course, both separated by a semi-permeable membrane. Now, only solvent molecules can pass through the semi-permeable membrane, and because you have applied pressure greater than that of osmotic pressure, the water from seawater side keeps moving into the pure water side because of the concentration gradient. And that is how desalination of water is done. Okay, so reverse osmosis is such an important phenomenon, and that is formulated by only if you determine osmotic pressure of the liquid, otherwise no. So desalination of water can be planned only if you could determine osmotic pressure, and that's how osmotic pressure is very understanding or determining osmotic pressure is very important. Clear? Now what are we left with in this? Now we understood the meaning of osmosis, we understood the meaning of osmotic pressure. Now we need to understand why and how osmotic pressure is a colligative property. And you know very well, major application of colligative properties is to determine the molar mass of unknown solute. Now, how using osmotic pressure molar masses of unknown solutes are determined? These two things we have to understand now. Okay, let's proceed. Before I go for explaining why and how osmotic pressure is a colligative property, a quick look at this thing for your general knowledge. The difference between osmosis and diffusion. See, liquids do diffuse. Liquids and gases both diffuse. We have studied that in school. A very easy to understand example is, if you place a drop of ink onto the surface of water in any vessel, you can notice the ink slowly diffusing into water and spreading across water and coloring the water also, whatever the color you must have taken. That is diffusion of liquids into each other. Then how is osmosis different from diffusion? Let us understand that. See here, osmosis does need semi-permeable membrane for it to happen, whereas diffusion doesn't need any semi-permeable membrane. Just if the liquids come into contact with each other, they diffuse into each other. Okay. Then osmosis is the phenomenon of movement of solvent alone. So in osmosis, we see flow of solvent alone because the very name is semi-permeable membrane. It does not allow everything to pass through it. So it allows only solvent molecules to pass through it, not solute molecules. Whereas diffusion involves both solute and solvent. As in this ink example I was talking about, water diffuses into ink, ink diffuses into water. They diffuse into each other and mix up. That's why you can say diffusion involves both solute and solvent. Then osmosis is movement of solvent molecules from low concentration to the high concentration, whereas here movement of solvent molecules will be from high concentration always to the low concentration. Again, if you go with this ink example, osmosis you have understood. If you go with this ink example, what you can understand, ink drop is full of substances. It's highly concentrated and it is diffusing more into, means movement of water to ink, ink to water. If you see, it is diffusing more into water. So from high concentration, the liquid is flowing into the low concentration. Likewise, the solvent flows from high concentration to low concentration in case of diffusion. In case of osmosis, it flows from low concentration to high concentration. Are you understanding? Osmosis is restricted to only liquid solutions, means liquid flowing from lower concentration to higher concentration. Whereas just now I was mentioning, even gases diffuse and gases diffuse extensively. So diffusion is for both gases and liquids, whereas osmosis is for only liquids. Then another important thing to be noted here is, see, osmosis can be stopped, even can be reversed. Just now I told you. See, if you apply exactly external pressure equal to osmotic pressure, it will be stopped. If you apply pressure more than osmotic pressure, it can be reversed. But diffusion cannot be stopped or cannot be reversed. This is the important differences between osmosis and diffusion. Okay. With that very fundamental understanding of meaning of osmosis, meaning of a diffusion, differences between them, and the meaning of osmotic pressure and important applications of osmosis as well as osmotic pressure, we have finished. Now let us get into how osmotic pressure is a colligative property that can be understood only from its mathematical expression. Let me introduce that to you. See, osmosis was introduced or studied and explained to the world for the first time by a scientist named Abe Nollet somewhere in 1748. Then somewhere in 1880s, 1885 or so, a scientist named Van 't Hoff studied extensively about osmotic pressure. By the way, osmotic pressure is given by the symbol pi, as I told you in the previous session. So somewhere in 1885, Van 't Hoff did extensive study on dilute solutions. While doing his study on dilute solutions, he concluded something about osmotic pressure of dilute solutions. What Van 't Hoff says is, like gases under very low pressure and very high temperature behave ideal, solutions with very low concentration, which we call them dilute solutions, behave ideal. So you can call dilute solutions as ideal solutions. Because dilute solutions behave ideal, like you have an ideal gas equation, you can have an ideal solution equation, which is otherwise called Van 't Hoff law. Van 't Hoff's law for ideal solutions. So, like ideal gases have an equation called ideal equation, ideal solutions have an ideal equation called Van 't Hoff's law, which is expressed as pi v is equal to nRT. Like in your ideal gas equation, it was PV is equal to nRT. Here it is pi v is equal to nRT, where pi is the osmotic pressure, V is the volume of the solution, N is the number of moles of solute present in the solution, R is of course ideal gas equation. Depending upon the units of osmotic pressure, you decide the value of R, which you have studied last year already. Then T is the Kelvin temperature. Now I can write pi is equal to N by V into RT. You know very well, number of moles per unit volume is nothing but molarity. Number of moles per liter is nothing but molarity. So I can finally write pi is equal to mRT. This is the Van 't Hoff equation for expressing osmotic pressure. This is the mathematical expression for osmotic pressure. Now, how do we determine molar mass of solute from osmotic pressure value? We know that molarity is equal to weight of solute divided by molar mass of solute into 1000 by volume of solution expressed in milliliters. This you have studied both in first year and probably in the beginning of this chapter in second year before your lockdown. Remember, molarity is a very popular formula. Now in this expression, you substitute the expression for molarity. Pi is equal to WB into 1000 into R into T divided by MB into volume of solution in ml. Therefore, molar mass of solute is equal to WB into 1000 into R into T divided by pi into V. Divided by pi into V. So this is the relation between molar mass of solute and vapor pressure. Now please understand and remember, totally 4 expressions we got for determining molar mass of solute from the 4 colligative properties. Molar mass of solute versus RLVP, molar mass of solute versus delta TB, molar mass of solute versus delta TF, and molar mass of solute versus pi. All these 4 expressions are very important, especially for your board exams. I'll come to that, by the way. Okay. Now you please notice, from Van't Hoff law, pi is equal to mRT, and by substituting the expression for molarity in terms of molar weight of solute and molar mass of solute, we arrive at the expression for molar mass of solute. Now, when an unknown solute comes into the laboratory, they prepare dilute solution of that unknown non-volatile solid solute and experimentally determine the osmotic pressure of that solution. How do they experimentally determine osmotic pressure will be my next topic. I'll come to it. After determining experimentally the osmotic pressure of that solution, they substitute all the values here and obtain the molar mass of solute. And by the way, if the solute, the unknown solute whose molar mass we are determining is a macromolecule, like in case of polymers, which could be biopolymers like proteins, carbohydrates, etc. Or it could be regular synthetic polymers like nylon, terylene, polyester, whatever they are. Any macromolecule like polymers comes into the laboratory and its molecular mass has to be determined. If I prepare solution of that macromolecule and try to determine properties like RLVP or delta TB or delta TF, the values of RLVP or delta TB or delta TF come in very small digits, in very small magnitude. Since the magnitude comes very small because the molar mass is very large. From such magnitudes, determining molar mass becomes very difficult. Whereas osmotic pressure value for even macromolecules comes in fairly large value. That's why for determination of molar mass for polymers and other macromolecules, osmotic pressure method is the best method compared to RLVP method, delta TB method or delta TF method. Okay, for these 2 reasons which I was explaining you, reason number 1 is the magnitude of other 3 properties comes very small, but the magnitude of osmotic pressure comes significantly large, number 1. Number 2, to determine the molar mass of that, the solution has to be subjected to different temperatures, whether you want to determine RLVP or delta TB or delta TF. Whereas osmotic pressure can be determined at room temperature itself. You need not heat. Now, there is every chance these substances degrade easily when you heat them. Because osmotic pressure is determined at room temperature, it will be convenient to determine, and from value of osmotic pressure, it will be convenient to determine their molar mass. So, conclusion, among the 4 properties you have for determining molar mass of a non-volatile solid solute by preparing a dilute solution in a solvent in which that is soluble, for macromolecules, for polymers, osmotic pressure method is the best method. Clear? Now, there is one additional knowledge I need to provide you here. A pair of solutions separated by a semi-permeable membrane can be classified into 3 types: isotonic solutions, hypotonic solutions, and hypertonic solutions. Isotonic solutions, hypotonic solutions, and hypertonic solutions. Let me explain. A pair of solutions separated by a semi-permeable membrane, both of them have same value of osmotic pressure. That case, there will be no osmosis happening, by the way. So, a pair of solutions separated by a semi-permeable membrane, both of which have same osmotic pressure, then those 2 solutions are said to be isotonic with each other. And by the way, look at the expression, pi is equal to mRT. at a given temperature, both liquids are kept at the same temperature, right? At a given temperature, both temperature and this universal gas constant are constants, then you can understand when pi is same on both sides for both solutions, that means concentration must also be same. That means they must be having equimolar concentrations. So very simple. Two solutions of equimolar concentrations separated by a semi-permeable membrane would have the same osmotic pressure and will be called isotonic solutions. Whereas molar concentrations are different, then osmotic pressure also will be different. The one with lower molar concentration or lower osmotic pressure is said to be hypotonic solution among the two which are separated. The one with higher molarity and higher osmotic pressure value is said to be hypertonic solution. So when you separate a pair of solutions by semi-permeable membrane, there is possibility that there must be a pair of isotonic, or one must be hypotonic and the other must be hypertonic. Now, this understanding is biologically very, very important. One classic example I'll give you. See, you are highly dehydrated due to diarrhea or due to a sunstroke or anything, you are highly dehydrated. When you are admitted in the hospital, they give you an intravenous injection which will be labeled as NS most of the times, and rarely it could be DNS also. Here NS actually means normal saline. You must have heard of this already. DNS means dextrose normal saline, where dextrose means glucose. Why glucose is otherwise called dextrose, you will understand in biomolecules chapter after understanding optical isomerism also better, don't worry. So normal saline or dextrose normal saline, here for instant energy they are adding glucose, otherwise mainly the one causing electrolyte balance is normal saline, and normal saline is 0.985% weight by volume solution, aqueous solution of sodium chloride. What is normal saline? 0.985% weight by volume aqueous solution of sodium chloride. That means in every 100 ml of distilled water, I repeat, in every 100 ml of distilled water, 0.985 grams of sodium chloride is dissolved. At that concentration, you call it as normal saline. Now, why do we exactly maintain that concentration? Reason is simple. This normal saline composition which I have mentioned here is isotonic with blood cells. Means the concentration of blood cells and concentration of this normal saline will be same, so that no osmosis occurs. No osmosis occurs. Whereas if you take normal saline concentration more than what I have mentioned here, means if you inject intravenously any saline solution which is more than normal saline concentration, for example, then what is happening? Blood cell will be hypotonic and saline water will be hypertonic. Now always solvent flows from lower concentration to higher concentration. Hypotonic solution to hypertonic solution when separated by a semi-permeable membrane. Blood cell, the plasma membrane of blood cell is nothing but a semi-permeable membrane. So from blood cell, the solvent molecules, means the water starts flowing outside into the saline water that you have injected. As a result, the blood cell will be shrinking. Case 2. You have taken higher concentration of, lower concentration of normal saline than this prescribed value. Means you are injecting a saline water whose concentration is less than this. Then again, this becomes hypotonic, blood cell becomes hypertonic, then the water continuously flows from saline into blood cell. So blood cell receives water, bulges and blasts at some point, ruptures at some point. Both of them leading to serious repercussions in terms of biological activity of the human body. I can simply say it leads into some diseases. Why am I beating around the bush? it leads to some serious diseases like anemia and other aspects. Okay, so maintaining this concentration becomes so important. That is the significance of solutions being isotonic. Means by making solutions isotonic across a semi-permeable membrane, we are preventing osmosis, which otherwise could be unsafe. Clear? This is some preliminary information about osmosis as well as mathematical expression of osmotic pressure and determination of molar mass using osmotic pressure. Now, if an unknown solute comes into the laboratory and I want to determine its molar mass using osmotic pressure value, then I should determine osmotic pressure experimentally, right? How is osmotic pressure determined experimentally? That is our next discussion. Okay. The osmotic pressure is determined experimentally by a method called Berkeley-Hartley method. There are more than one methods, but this is the most popular one, and of course they are in our syllabus. That too for entrance is generally asked. However, now focus on this central part once. Hope I have drawn the diagram fairly well. Focus on this central part once. This is a porous part which is impregnated with cupric ferrocyanide on its walls. Focus on the central part. It is a porous part with cupric ferrocyanide on its walls. Now that cupric ferrocyanide I have just told you, it is an artificial semi-permeable membrane. So cupric ferrocyanide acts as a semi-permeable membrane. So I can label this as porous part with cupric ferrocyanide on its walls, which acts as semi-permeable membrane. Okay. Now this porous part has water reservoir on the one side. This is the water reservoir using which you can keep pouring water into the porous part. So this porous part must be filled with water when the experiment has to start. The other side it will be having capillary indicator. What is the use of this capillary indicator? It will tell you if the water from this porous part is reducing. From this side we are pouring the water. As the quantity of water increases in this porous part, the level of water increases in the capillary tube and reaches a point. Now, if water escapes through semi-permeable membrane, then the level in capillary indicator will reduce. That will be the indication that the phenomenon of osmosis has started. That is why capillary indicator, and that is why, to fill the water is water reservoir. Now, this whole porous part containing water reservoir on one side and capillary indicator on the other side will be fitted inside a bronze vessel. Fitted inside a bronze vessel. Into this bronze vessel, we fill the solution for which osmotic pressure pi has to be determined. Means, say I have got an unknown solute whose molar mass has to be determined. Then I have dissolved that into a suitable solvent and prepared a solution. That solution's osmotic pressure I need to determine now. Right? Now that solution will be filled into this bronze vessel. That in turn is connected to another capillary tube which is fitted with piston on one side so that we can keep applying pressure by putting weights on the piston, and how much pressure is it consuming is determined by the pressure gauge this side. Now, if you understood the apparatus, if you understood this setup, then you understood the phenomenon also. The principle here is simple, children. By applying the pressure, I will check at what pressure this osmosis can be stopped. That pressure is called osmotic pressure for this solution. Simple. So now what happens actually, when I need to start checking the process, I will be pouring pure water. First I will be taking a solution here into this bronze vessel outside. Then I will be fitting piston here. Then we start filling this porous part with water. Then capillary indicator will be showing water level initially. Now starts the process of osmosis. The solvent will be flowing from pure water into the solution, that is into this bronze vessel outside. When that happens, the level of water in capillary indicator will be reducing, which is indicative of commencement of osmosis. Water movement has started here, that's why the level of water in this capillary indicator will reduce. Now what we will start doing? We will start putting weights on this piston and start creating pressure on this solution and keep observing this capillary level. By applying how much of pressure, the capillary level remains constant. It won't start decreasing. It won't continue to decrease. At that point, the process of osmosis has stopped. So, if capillary indicator shows the level constant, that means the process of osmosis has stopped. When the process of osmosis has stopped, please mark from the pressure gauge how much pressure it has taken to stop the process of osmosis, to make the level of water in the capillary indicator constant. That pressure will be noted as osmotic pressure of this solution. Hope it was very simple and easy. I'll quickly repeat. The porous part contains cuprous ferrocyanide, the semi-permeable membrane, to allow the flow of solvent molecules as soon as the pure solvent is separated by the solution. Through this reservoir, we will fill the water, and capillary indicator, there will be a water level. Once movement of solvent molecule starts through semi-permeable membrane into this solution, which is filled in this outside bronze vessel, the capillary water indicator, the level starts decreasing. Then we will apply pressure here by putting weights on the piston and check at what pressure this level remains constant. That pressure is called osmotic pressure of this solution. This is called Berkeley-Hartley method of determining osmotic pressure for given dilute solution. Clear? With this, we have finished complete knowledge required for understanding osmosis and osmotic pressure, both theoretical as well as mathematical. Okay? See, you have learned 4 colligative properties. First one was RLVP, and you learnt, I am summarizing only the mathematical expressions here. You have learnt that P0 minus P by P0 is equal to XB, that is mole fraction of solute, the first thing to be noted. Then secondly, in the place of XB you took NB by NA, which is WB into MA by MB into WA. Using that, you arrived at an expression MB is equal to WB into MA by WA into RLVP, P0 minus P by P0. So here, I insist again, when you are practicing the formulae, practice along with the meanings of the terms present here. So, molar mass of solute is equal to weight of solute into molar mass of solvent divided by weight of solvent into RLVP. Like that, we will be determining molar mass. Next. Second one we understood was delta TB. We understood that delta TB, elevation in boiling point, is equal to ebullioscopic constant, that is Kb, into molality of the solution. Now, by substituting the expression for molality, that is weight of solute divided by molar mass of solute into 1000 by weight of solvent in grams, and bringing molar mass of solvent onto the LHS, you got Kb into weight of solute into 1000 divided by weight of solvent in grams into delta TB. This was the expression for determining molar mass of solute using delta TB, that is elevation in boiling point. Now, depression in freezing point was quite similar, except that it talks about boiling, it talks about freezing, and then there it is Kb, here it is Kf. So, delta Tf is equal to Kf into, that is cryoscopic constant or molar depression constant into molality, you have understood. Then you determine the expression for molar mass of solute came as Kf into weight of solute into 1000 divided by weight of solvent in grams into delta Tf. Lastly, we got osmotic pressure. We understood that osmotic pressure pi is equal to MRT, basic mathematical expression. Then by substituting the required values in the place of molarity and bringing molar mass of solute on the LHS, you got molar mass of solute is equal to weight of solute into 1000 into R into T divided by volume of solution in milliliters into pi, that is osmotic pressure. Now these four expressions which relate molar mass of solute with the given colligative property are the only mathematical expressions required from this chapter to solve numerical questions. To your happiness as well as surprise, as long as your board exam is concerned. Whereas we have very good mathematical relations in terms of Henry's law, in terms of Raoult's law for solutions containing non-volatile solute and Raoult's law for solutions, liquid solutions. Though all these are present and basic formulae for all colligative properties are also present, but in board exam, in physical chemistry section, in a 5 marks question, this chapter contains totally 7 marks. 2 marks will come as 2 1-mark questions in the beginning, question numbers 1 and 2. Then in the 5 marks question section, in physical chemistry section, question number 27, it will be divided into 2 parts. One is 3 marks question, one is 2 mark question. In that 3 marks question section, from any one of these 4 formulae, you will get one numerical question guaranteed. 3 marks in your pocket. And remaining all in your board exams will be theoretical questions based on any concept, rest of the concepts in the chapter which I have discussed so far. Clear? Having said that, I want to leave you with one very important note here. The note is, observe every relation between molar mass and colligative property, they are inversely proportional. So for every colligative property is inversely proportional to the molar mass of the solute. Make a note of that. We will talk about that when we will talk about that. Okay? Because the next topic after this in tomorrow's session will be abnormal molar masses obtained by this colligative properties method. Why do we obtain abnormal molar masses? And what happens to colligative property and how molar mass changes? All these discussions will be there tomorrow in the discussion of abnormal molar masses. That's why I want you to note that every colligative property is inversely proportional to the molar mass of the solute. Okay. Now let us go to the numerical exercise related to all the colligative properties. Okay. Let us solve entrance corner 2.6 that contains numerical questions based on colligative properties. Looking at the first question, he is talking about aqueous solution of common salt, sodium chloride. 5.8 grams of common salt is dissolved in 100 ml of water and he is asking you what is RLVP. Now here, options are given, they are quite comfortable, so calculation is not an issue in this problem. Here, you know very well P0 minus P by P0, this is the expression for RLVP, this ratio is called RLVP, is equal to XB, mole fraction. So if you want RLVP, you need to find mole fraction of sodium chloride, that's all. So indirectly it is a mole fraction question, that's all, nothing else. Now to find mole fraction, you know very well mole fraction XB is equal to number of moles of solute NB into number of moles of solvent Na plus number of moles of solute Nb. Since we take dilute solutions, Nb in the denominator is negligible, you know that. But even with or without that, you can solve this problem, not an issue. So number of moles of solute Nb is equal to 5.85 divided by 58.5. Because in sodium chloride, sodium atomic mass is 23, chlorine atomic mass is 35.5. If you add, you will get total 58.5. Now number of moles is nothing but given weight divided by gram molecular weight, right? So 5.85 by 58.5, which comes out to be 0.1. Then number of moles, please understand here, you need weight of water by molar mass of water. But he has given volume. But whenever this happens, please understand for all theoretical requirements, we take density of water is equal to 1 gram per ml. We don't mind doing that. That's why don't panic here, don't worry that they have given density of water and all. It is taken for granted it is 1 gram per ml. So 100 ml is 100 grams. So weight of water is 100 grams, its molar mass is 18. Obviously, number of moles will come larger. Here 58.5 is the molar mass, but you have very small quantity, but here 18 molar mass, very large quantity, so you will get 5.56 if you do it. Substitute them here, that's your answer. 0.1 divided by 0.1 plus 5.56, that is 0.1 divided by 5.66. Correct? If you simplify, you will end up getting very small mole fraction, of course, for solute. Here, because number of moles of solvent is so large, mole fraction of solvent will be much larger. So the answer comes out to be 0.018. That is your option B. A simple straightforward question. Calculate mole fraction, that is equal to RLVP as per the basic formula. Go through the second question. Urea solution is taken and he has given you molality 0.25 molar solution of urea, and he has given you cryoscopic constant for water 1.86 Kelvin kilogram per mole or degree Celsius kilogram per mole. Because it is the difference in degrees, it's one and the same. Then he is asking you freezing point of the solution. See, as long as it is aqueous solution, you know freezing point of pure water is 0. Now if you find delta TF, negative value of delta TF will be nothing but freezing point, because delta TF is nothing but generally freezing point decreases. That's why freezing point of pure water minus freezing point of the solution. Now freezing point of pure water is 0. 0 minus anything should give you negative. That's why options are also a negative value. So you find delta TF, take the negative of that, it becomes the freezing point of the solution. Correct? Now direct substitution. Delta TF is equal to KF into molality, basic formula. He has given you KF, he has given you molality. So you want delta TF. So multiply 1.86 into 0.25. That's all. Okay. So if you multiply 1.86 into 0.25, this is close to 2, this is close to 0.2. You should have got it easily, close to 0.4. So you will get 0.465 as delta TF. And as I was already telling you, delta TF is equal to TF naught minus TF, that is freezing point of pure water minus freezing point of solution. Since it is in degrees Celsius, 0 minus 0.465, which gives you 0.465 minus 0.465 degrees Celsius. A simple straightforward question. Looking very easy, right? We may have better questions in the next, let us see. If you look at question number 3, he has taken 5% solution of aqueous urea. Urea formula is NH2C double bond O NH2. This is exactly the structural formula of urea. NH2 taken twice CO. Now, aqueous urea 5% solution he has given you, and he is asking you osmotic pressure. Now, osmotic pressure formula is pi is equal to mRT. By the way, the options were given in bar if you notice. That's why you will have to take R value also in bar. I'll come to that, not an issue. However, see, what you need here is molarity, and you know molarity is nothing but number of moles of solute per unit volume of solution. So what you need is volume of solution and mass of solute to get molarity, right? Temperature and all we will take. By the way, I forgot to check the temperature. Okay, I have noted temperature and options for my convenience. Okay, coming back. So temperature is given, R value we will get based on in bar units, not an issue. Only issue here is he did not mention, there is an ambiguity in question, that's what I am trying to impress upon you. He did not mention whether it is 5% by mass or 5% mass by volume. He did not clearly mention it. Simply he said 5% aqueous solution of urea. Now, if he meant 5% by mass, In molarity, we have number of moles per unit volume, so we need volume of solution. So if he is mentioning 5% by mass of solution, he should have given us density to calculate volume for molarity. Because he has not given us density, we can take it for granted he is meaning 5% weight by volume only. Now what do you mean by 5% weight by volume solution? 5 grams of urea in 100 ml of solution. 5 grams of urea in 100 ml of solution. That is the meaning of 5% weight by volume. Though he did not mention weight by volume, because he did not give density, I am taking it for granted. Got it? Now, which means that weight of solute is 5 grams and volume of solution is 100 ml. Now, if you add atomic masses of all these things, urea molar mass comes out to be 60, which he has directly given in the question itself. 60 grams per mole. So, first let me calculate molarity. Molarity is equal to weight of solute by molar mass of solution into 1000 by volume of solution in ml. Weight of solute is 5, molar mass is 60 into 1000 divided by volume of solution is 100 because he said percent. So 10 times, so you will be left with 5 by 6. 5 by 6 comes out to be somewhere 6 8s are 48, then 6 3s are 18, 83 recurring you will get. So I will take 0.83 molar. Okay. Now pi is equal to 0.83, that is molarity, into the R value in terms of, I'll write this as moles per liter, into the R value in terms of bar will be 0.0831 liters bar mole inverse Kelvin inverse. These are the units of R in terms of bar. If it were atmosphere, 0.0821 I would have taken, into temperature 273 Kelvin. Okay, Kelvin inverse gets cancelled, mole inverse gets cancelled, liter inverse gets cancelled. You will end up the answer in bar. That's how it is going to be. And multiply everything, you will notice that the answer will be 18.83 bar. Here, when it comes to calculations, these options look a little closer, so too much of rounding off may not be allowed for us here. So you can do simplifications on your at your leisure and check the answer is 18.83 bar. Okay, so this was another simple question only. Even I won't tag it as a level 2 question. It is level 1 question only. Only thing is, from percentage by mass you got molarity, so it's indirectly again concentration terms based question, because calculating osmotic pressure was very easy later. So he has given you percentage weight by volume, you converted percentage weight by volume to molarity, then substituted and got your answer. Okay, let's go to question number 4. If you check question number 4, he has given you two conditions, means at one concentration, which was done by using 36 grams of glucose in a given solution, the osmotic pressure was 4.98 bar. Now at the same temperature, at some other concentration, osmotic pressure was observed to be 1.52 bar. What concentration could it have been? He is asking. And by the way, 36 grams per liter he has mentioned, that we have to notice. Clear? So he is asking osmotic pressures, he has given osmotic pressures at two different concentrations, and he has given you information required to calculate first concentration. He is asking you in second concentration. So simple, right? Now, by the way, in options they must have printed in your book small m. There is a difference. We chemistry people know it, but the EDP people may not. So they have printed small m for everything. Correct it as capital M. Okay. Now, see, pi 1 should be equal to m1 into RT. Pi 2 should be equal to m2 into RT, because he said temperature is same and R is anyhow constant. So if you cancel them, you will end up getting pi 1 by pi 2 is equal to m1 by m2, because pi is directly proportional to concentration and temperature he said is constant. Now, pi 1 he has given 4.98, pi 2 he has given 1.52. Now if you could find M1, you can find M2. Correct? Huh? Now only thing is you need to get M1 first. Now M1, what is it? Number of moles of solute per liter. He has already given per liter. Means I need not worry about volume. If I find number of moles, that will be molarity only. So 36 by 180 would be the molar mass of glucose. The formula is C6H12O6, 12 into 6, 12 into, 1 into 12 and 16 into 6. If you add everything, you will get 180. You know it very well. Now 36 by 180, so I can say 9 fours, 9 20s, 1 by 5. 1 by 5 is going to be 0.2 molar. Now substitute here. 0.2 molar divided by M2. Now get your answer. M2 is equal to 0.2 into 1.52 divided by 4.98, which is almost equal to 5. So you can see denominator is larger than numerator. When denominator is larger than numerator, either this or this should be the answers. These two cannot be, as you can notice clearly here. And since numerator is very small value, I think this would be the answer without doing any calculations. You can do it and cross check. You will end up getting 0.061 molar. Clear? So he has given two different pi values at two different concentrations. He has given one concentration as the other. So pi 1 by pi 2 is equal to M1 by M2. Easy? In fifth question, the unknown non-volatile solute, 1 gram of it, appears to be dissolved in 100 grams of acetone solvent. Pure acetone exerts a vapor pressure of 195 millimeters of mercury, and after dissolving the solute, the solution was exerting a vapor pressure of 192.5 millimeters. Okay. Then he is asking what is the molar mass of the solute. This is the kind of problems I told will be appearing in board exams in that particular guaranteed question I was mentioning. Okay. Now I'll not go for deriving the formula again because we have done it many a times so far. So as you remember, molar mass of solute is related to relative lowering of vapor pressure as weight of solute into molar mass of solvent divided by weight of solvent into P naught minus P by P naught. Now, when it comes to your board exams, I have seen instances when we got the scanned copy of the script for revaluation. I have seen instances where children who have done in more than one steps were not given marks. That's why first write the formula and then substitute in it and get your answer, get your 3 marks. Okay. So weight of solute into molar mass of solvent divided by weight of solvent into P naught minus P by P naught. Then P naught minus P by P naught will come here. 195 minus 192.5 will be 2.5 divided by 195. So weight of solute is 1 into acetone. He has only given you molar mass, we need not calculate. It is 58 divided by weight of solvent is given 100 into 2.5 divided by 195. So 195 goes up. So 58 into 195 divided by 100 into 2.5. Options are quite far. Calculations are relatively comfortable. You have got nearest values to take. You can convert this to 60. You can convert this to 200 and then do the calculations and check how it comes out. Your answer is going to be 45.3 grams per mole. Okay. So it's a straight question. All the inputs required for calculating molar mass are given. Substitute, get your answer. I know every problem is looking very easy. Don't worry, we'll do challenging problems in objective worksheet. Okay. Another similar question in question number 6. This time calculating molar mass from depression in freezing point. Previously it was from RLBP. Now, weight of solute is given, weight of solvent also is given, and freezing point of solution is given. And Kf value is given and molar mass is asked. Let us put the formula first. You know delta Tf is equal to Kf into m, and by substituting the formula for Km molality and bringing molar mass onto the left side, you will get the formula molar mass of solute is equal to Kf into weight of solute into 1000 divided by weight of solvent into weight of solute in grams divided by weight of solvent into delta Tf. This is going to be the formula. Okay, now we have everything that is required. Only thing is we need to calculate delta Tf and substitute here. Delta Tf is equal to Tf naught minus Tf, as I told you. Tf naught, that is freezing point of pure water, is 273 Kelvin, 0 degrees Celsius, minus this is 272.187 Kelvin. If you subtract, you will get 0.813. Now 0.813 delta Tf and rest of the values substitute here. Kf is given as 1.86 into weight of solute is given as 0.6 grams into 1000 divided by weight of solvent is given as 21.7 grams into delta Tf we calculated it as 0.813. Solve everything, you will end up getting 63.26 grams per mole as the molar mass of the solute. Another straightforward problem. Okay. Now this I can call it as a level 2 problem. Okay. See, it's an NCERT question. Two elements A and B can combine to form two different compounds AB2 and AB4. Law of multiple proportions. Now fixed weight of solvent they have given, that is 20 grams benzene, and Kf value for benzene is 5.1 Kelvin kilogram per mole. Now he is saying when 1 gram of compound AB2 formed from AB is dissolved in 20 grams of benzene, the freezing point of benzene reduces by 2.3 Kelvin. Depression in freezing point is observed to be 2.3 Kelvin. When 1 gram of the compound AB4 is dissolved in 20 grams of benzene, the depression in freezing point is observed to be 1.3 Kelvin. Then from this knowledge, find out atomic masses of A and B, he is saying. See, logic is simple. Depression in freezing point, elevation in boiling point, RLVP, osmotic pressure, these are the colligative properties from which we can find molar masses of solutes. Now from the given information, if we find molar masses of solutes, then finding atomic masses of the constituent elements of the compound should not be an issue. So indirectly it is a problem which involves calculation of molar masses of solutes only. Clear? Now the formula for calculating molar mass of solute is Mb is equal to, okay, Kf into weight of solute into 1000 divided by weight of solvent in grams into delta Tf value, right? Now let us calculate both of them for both these. See, molar mass of AB2, for getting molar mass of AB2, 5.1 into weight of solute he has given 1 gram into 1000 divided by weight of solvent is 20 grams into how much was reduced? 2.3. Simplify this, you will end up getting around 110.87. Clear? Similarly, molar mass of AB4 if you calculate, again Kf is 5.1, he has taken 1 gram into 1000 divided by 20 into how much it has reduced? 1.3 Kelvin. If you simplify, you will end up getting 196.15. So we established that molar mass of AB2 is 110.87, molar mass of AB4 is 196.15. Now we want atomic masses of A and B separately. We'll try to get one first and then the other. Now you see, to get molecular mass of AB2, generally if you know formula and if you know atomic masses of every element in the formula, how do you calculate molecular masses? Let me assume atomic mass of A as A, atomic mass of B as B here. Then atomic mass of A plus 2 into atomic mass of B will be molecular mass of AB2, right? So I can write A plus 2B is equal to 110.87. Okay, whenever we calculate molecular masses from the known atomic masses, we will add atomic mass of all the elements in it. Same thing I am doing. Similarly, A plus 4B should be equal to 196.15. If you now what you do, actually I should have taken second equation first so that I can subtract second equation from the first, because I have larger values in this, if you notice. Okay, so let me take the reverse. That is, A plus 4B is equal to 196.15. A plus 2B is equal to 110.87. If you subtract, 15 minus 7 will be 8. Okay, 10 minus 8 will be 2, 5, 9 minus 1 is 8. So 85.28 you are getting if you subtract these two, and because you are putting minus here, A gets cancelled because you are subtracting this equation from this equation. So 4B minus 2B is 2B. So 2B is equal to 85.28. So B comes out to be 85.28 by 2. 2 4s 8, then 2 2s are 4, 2 6s are 12, 2 4s. So 42.64 grams per mole will be the atomic mass of B. Now from using any one equation you can calculate atomic mass of A and check what answer you will get. So I'll use the equation 2. So A plus 2 into 42.64, which we already got it as 85.28, is equal to 110.87, right? Therefore A is equal to 110.87 minus 85.28, that is 2 into 42.64, comes out to be 25.59. So your answer will be option A. Is that clear? So from the information of the depression in freezing points for both the solutes, we found out molar masses of each solute using the formula which is familiar to us. Then rest of it is just mathematics. Only up to this it was chemistry, rest of it is just mathematics. Okay, you subtracted equation 2 from equation 1 from equation 2 and then got the value for atomic mass of B. Then using any one equation you could get atomic mass of A. That is question number 7. Okay. Look at the last problem, students. See, two different solutes he has taken in water as the solvent. One is cane sugar, the other one is glucose. And he has prepared both the solutions with the same concentrations. Both 5% by mass, 5% by mass. Means 5 grams of solute in 100 grams of solution. That means 5 grams of cane sugar dissolved in 95 grams of water. 5 grams of glucose dissolved in 95 grams of water. So concentrations are same. Then cane sugar has reduced freezing point to 271. What is the freezing point of pure water? TF naught 273. That means it has reduced to 271, means how many degrees it has reduced? 2 degrees it has reduced. So delta TF is 2 degrees in case of cane sugar. Now he is asking what would be the freezing point of solution of glucose. If you find delta TF of glucose solution, you can get freezing point of glucose solution by subtracting from 273 again. That's not an issue. Correct? Huh? Now you see, you know delta TF is equal to KF into molality. I am substituting required values of molality. WB into 1000 divided by weight of solvent in grams into molar weight by molecular weight of this thing, Okay, so I have got Kf into weight of solute into 1000 by weight of solvent into its molar mass. Correct? Huh? Now, if I take expression, depression in freezing point for cane sugar as delta TF1 and depression in freezing point for glucose as delta TF2, you see, Kf value will be same because solvent is same. Weight of solute will be same in both cases 5 grams. Weight of solvent will be same in both cases, 95 grams, 1000 of course. That means it will be only molar masses of solutes that will be different for both. So if I take the ratio of these two, because molar mass of solute is in the denominator, I will end up getting M2 by M1. I am assuming 1 as cane sugar, 2 as glucose. Okay. Then cane sugar by glucose, that is delta TF1 by delta TF2 will be molar mass of second one, that is glucose, divided by molar mass of first one, that is cane sugar. Now cane sugar formula is C12H22O11. Add all the atomic masses, you will get 342. Familiar value. And glucose we know very well, C6H12O6, and comes out to be 180. Another familiar value. Now he said delta TF1 is 2 degrees. For cane sugar, the depression in freezing point is by 2 degrees. So 2 divided by delta TF2 is equal to molar mass of glucose 180 divided by molar mass of sugar, that is 342. Correct? Huh? Now cross multiply. Delta TF2 is equal to 2 into 342 divided by 180. Okay. Now this is close to 340, this is close to 170, because options look a little comfortable for me. I am daring to round up. 340, 170, it will go 2 times. So approximately 4 degrees depression should be there. 273 minus 4, if you want freezing point of the solution, 273 minus 4, which comes out to be 269, which is closest answer to 269. Option B. Is that clear? He gave 2 different solutes with the same concentration, and he gave you depression in freezing point for one solute. He is asking depression in freezing point for the other. Now because everything else is same, only the nature of solute is different, only molar masses will be different. And as you can see in the formula of delta TF, it is inversely proportional to molar mass. I have already told you in the beginning. That's why delta TF1 by delta TF2 will be M2 by M1. Now using this expression and using the values of both molar masses, because we know the formula of the solutes, I have calculated delta TF2 and subtracted delta TF value from the freezing point of water and got your answer. That was your entrance corner 2.6. Now we have a home exercise immediately below this entrance corner containing similar questions, that is questions based on colligative properties. That will be your homework for today. Please do it without fail. Okay.